Go. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Elizabeth Hamblet, founder of LD Advisory. So pleased to be joined again by my friends Jane and Jason Sarouhan, founder of J2 Guides, and also very lovely people who have very kindly once again offered to do a webinar for families of students with learning disabilities, ADHD, and we'll hopefully answer most of your questions this evening. Thank you, Jane and Jason. So in case you have no idea who I am and why I'm hosting this talk, I am a college learning disability specialist, and I have a new book coming out. So enjoy looking at this cover. Thank you. In fact, I've interviewed Jane and Jason for my next book, which is 7 Steps to Success, a pathway for students with disabilities. And as part of that book about transition to college, I also think it was really important to talk about gap experiences, because when you learn about the level of executive functioning and independence students really need to be successful at college, sometimes another year in between high school and college can be a really good idea. And one way to spend that year can be having a special experience. And that's what Jane and Jason are here to talk about. Please tell me you folks have a slide of your own all about you and your background.
What do you mean?
Excellent.
Here we are.
And with really, truly no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jane and Jason. Please put your questions in the comments. I'm going to let them run through the webinar. And then let's do the questions afterward. Multitasking, especially at this hour of the evening, it's 8 o'clock on the East Coast, and approaching my bedtime. It's just not one of my strengths at this hour. So let me pay attention to what they're saying, and then I promise to look and feed them your questions. And with that, I'm going to mute myself and get on with it. Okay.
I have to start just by mentioning that I'm getting mad texts right now from Alexi Walters, right to you, Elizabeth. I'm an old colleague from Understood, and she's saying how much she loved partnering and working with you and what a smarty pants you are. So I had to just pass on a hello to a mutual friend that we have. I'm Jane Sarouhan, and working alongside my amazing husband and J2 Guides co-founder, Jason. And yeah, Jason and I have devoted our entire professional careers to what we call experiential, experiential education. This idea of learning outside of the classroom, and in all the amazing ways that young adults, all of us really, but young adults in particular, between this ripe, ages of 18 to 24, have so much to gain in skills and confidence, independence, resiliency, perspective, if they take a pause from this treadmill to really examine who they are and what they need and all the other avenues there are to help them achieve that beyond just the high school to college path. Do you want to walk through a bit more some of what we've done to get here, or some of our other credentials? Or
Sure. Jane and I were both very fortunate in college, when neither of us knew each other, to go on 2 of the pioneering experiential education programs that were offered coming out of the United States. And it really set both of us on a path of wanting to help facilitate and lead these types of experiences for others. So both of us totally separately, congruently evolved into leaders within this field, and ultimately met as program directors and ultimately executive directors of a nonprofit organization that brought students of high school age, gap year age, and college age abroad to do community service. For 13 years now, we've worked as this very specialized niche of educational consultant, supporting individuals who want to take gap time.
And we're going to start with an overview of what we mean by gap time. LD or not, we want to start with a foundational definition so that we're all working with some kind of agreed upon language, because there's a lot of myths and misconceptions that accompany this conversation. It's got to be overseas. It's got to be all year. He or she has to be of a certain age, or they. No. So let's get really clear as a start on the working kind of phraseology or definition that Jason and I employ, which you can see in front of you. So if you can let your eyes land on any of these phrases that you see, I will put it together in a sentence, which is basically a gap year is an intentional period of time in which one is taking pause on their academic or career path in order to meaningfully engage in some other areas of interest. That's the definition that came out of my mouth today, and I'm sure I hit on most of those phrases. So you'll notice that I don't talk about how old you or your child is. I don't talk about where you have to be, how long this period of time is. The operative words here are intentional. This is something we've thought about. We believe this could be a really valuable next step. It is a finite period of time. Jason often talks about this is a bridge year or a bridge period of time. It isn't just the end point. It's just the next best step to help you achieve what you're looking to go to after. Often it's hands-on. And again, this is where I think for LD and, and all students, pretty much everybody learns best when they're actually in it and doing it and not just reading about it. So I think that is also another really essential piece of a good and foundational working definition of what a gap year is.
And because this is an LD workshop about gap year, and as parents of a child with learning differences, we can really lean into the fact that all of us are incredibly unique human beings on this planet. And a gift and perhaps advantage in this scenario is that your unique child really knows what they probably need, right? They're really used to being resilient and finding workarounds and figuring out the right path for them. And it may not always reflect the path that their peers are taking at that moment. And gap year is going to be that, right? It's not going to reflect what most of the students at your child's high school are going off to do. And yet that unique journey is going to be so tailored to that person that ultimately it's going to just pay off in spades because you'll have really thought about your goals and ultimately sought out experiences that are going to be hugely beneficial once you go on to whatever that next step is.
Absolutely. It's such an evocative space or field with images, the destinations and the smiling faces. So we didn't want to get too deep into the conversation. We're all different kinds of learners without putting just this beautiful visual. This is students from as recently as this year to probably just 2 years ago. It's all really fresh. Mixture of students doing all kinds of things, all different kinds of places. And we wanted to kind of give that visual demonstration of the definition that we just shared. And again, highlight some of those key phrases of what we see every single gapper kind of gaining and being exposed to on their gap year, again, regardless of their kind of learning modality, strengths, or challenges. Hands-on learning is happening in pretty much every picture here. That is what any gapper, no matter what, is going to be engaged with. Their minds, yes, intellectual, it's spiritual. It's going to also have these really wonderful tactile hands-on components almost always.
Experiential learning is generally also not academically oriented. It can be highly intellectually engaging, but it's really about skill building, whether those are soft skills like being a better communicator or being more effective in teams, or being able to more hard skill oriented, learn how to data program or learning how to cook. These life skills are all really beneficial to anyone in that 18 to 25-year-old age set, arguably beneficial to all of us. And that's what gap year and experiential education is all about.
And these last two of, excuse me, I am getting over COVID and this tickly cough will not go away. Mentors and peers. You could spend, or your child could spend, a year living at home in between high school and college, working and having a great job and have those first kind of phrases kind of checked off. Hands-on learning, soft and hard skills, check, but they most likely won't have mentors and peers. And to us, that is an incredibly important facet of at least a portion, if not the totality of the time we're looking at, whether you have a summer or semester, a year or more, to have a certain portion of the gap time with a robust group of other gap peers and inspiring mentors. And as Jason said, these aren't necessarily academic mentors. These are just inspiring, somewhere between usually 25 and 35-year-olds. They might be multilingual, they're world travelers, they're yogis, they have their masters. They're just brilliant and wonderful people that are passionate educators and want to be a part of your child's life for a period of time to help impart that sense of confidence and genuine curiosity in the world. So those two together, I think, are really what help round out a meaningful period of time if one were to really lean into the gap opportunity.
It's no accident that on this slide, you're seeing so many smiling faces. And, of course, we're choosing these photos, but one of the things we see over and over again as we go visit sites and visit our students in this country, as well as all around the world, is that students are so engaged and they're happy. They often talk about the idea that they've had this love of learning reignited, or the flames of that love of learning really fanned in a significant way. And the happiness, even in the pandemic, even in the beginning, when we all knew nothing, when there were no vaccines, when there was no idea how long this first wave of things was going to last, gap year students were still out there. They were the ones who were actually engaging and making new friends while the rest of us were stuck at home. And that thread has continued forward in these next couple of years as well. So gap time is a time for students to engage happiness and a positive sense of themselves, positive self-confidence and connections with peers.
And for anyone who is, tuned in with a neurodiverse or a child with a learning difference, as we are also parents of, we know that if our child is dysregulated, there is no happiness and there is no learning happening. But when our child is feeling grounded and loved and empathized with, and is then their ability to learn and reconnect is just off the charts. And so as a segue, maybe to really start to shift, how can a gap year benefit an LD student? We wanted to point out, 7 or 8 reasons why we know gap years are wildly successful for LD students, but really for any young adult who's kind of on that precipice of change, of needing something. They don't know what, but they know they need something else. They're curious, they're thirsty. Maybe they're sad and lonely and managing some depression. But something isn't right. And that next step isn't an automatic. And that's a great moment to take pause and just ask the question, how could a gap year benefit us? I don't know that we need to read each of these, but I think it's really worth you taking a moment to take it in and feel good about recognizing that one or two or all of them feel like they resonate for you as a family. And if anything, this is a sort of a placeholder, reminder that you are not alone. If we've taken the time to put them up on this slide, it means they are the most kind of commonly reported reasons why students are both coming to a gap year, and similarly, the benefits that they are reporting taking from the gap year.
And something interesting that we've watched now for the last couple of years is just each successive class of students that's taking gap time since the pandemic began. And we can tell you that the class that is beginning to take gap time right now, that's out in the field, as we call it, is one of the most fragile groups of young adults that our field has ever seen in 30 years. Of course, this isn't their fault. It's been a really hard couple of years, but they were young when the pandemic happened. They missed important years of school and time with their friends. And we're seeing that play out. And of course, we know that students with learning disabilities are even more vulnerable to some of this level of fragility, the anxiety, increased rates of depression, et cetera. Gap time is an amazing opportunity to feel like you are healing, like you are, as Jane was saying, cocooned in a positive environment, both socially and from a mentorship standpoint. It is so heartbreaking for us to hear from students at this time of year who decided to go off to college right after high school, and they get there and they're completely overwhelmed, because that's just becomes this big I failed in their minds, right? They're having to leave school either in the middle of the semester or at the semester mark, and they may be going back, they may not, but now they're looking at gap time. And that's a really hard place to come back from, is this, I tried something, it was too much, I don't even know if I can get back there, but right now I have to address this space that I'm in. We would much rather see students take this time prior to going on to college, if that's the right fit, or whatever your next educational portion of your journey is like. Do it in advance to really bolster yourself and build up that resiliency so you can feel successful the first go around.
I think we do want to walk you through these one by one, the columns, and maybe we'll alternate.
Sure.
But this is where we like to do a little bit of more myth busting, but also start to feather in now more specifically how gap year experiences are really designed, whether overtly or just in their infrastructure, to support a wide range of students and learners. I'll just kick off with the first column in terms of, there's a lot of fear and anxiety that taking gap time is going to derail the process. It's going to derail your child's life or long-term educational process. They're going to lose study habits. For those of us who've had kids on IEPs or 504s and whatnot throughout, unlike we just had an IEP meeting today with a team of 8 people, and they're like family, and one's going on maternity leave, and we're all like, no, right? So these people become so important to the fabric of our child's growth and education. So what we want to say to that is there have been a few studies. Jason and I also have almost 30 years anecdotally to report out on the fact that there's no evidence to support that students will lose their study habits or lose their passion for learning. If anything, it's the opposite. And the few studies that have come out, and we can drop a link when I'm done with the screen share, or Elizabeth can, that points you towards some of those resources. But what we are seeing and what the studies are supporting is that gappers, in fact, are achieving higher GPAs once they hit college than their non-gap peers. Similarly, gappers are graduating college in consistently closer to 4 years, where the national average, and no one talks about this on the college tours, is closer to 6 years. So this year is not going to be a year off. It is not going to, as best we've been able to assess, derail the academic or just overall growth process. In fact, if anything, what we see, and when I talk to deans at colleges all around the country, is students, they can pick the gappers out. They'll tell you that all the time. They see kids coming in with their kind of shoulders thrown on their back, standing a little bit taller, a lot more confident, resilient, sitting in the front of the class, participating in discussions, utilizing office hours, much more agency and engagement. And we all believe it's because of that extra year of growth and maturity and experiences that have enabled them at 19 or 20, even for some, to then step on that college campus really ready for those next steps. So just want to start with that first kind of pillar of questions and concerns that we often receive.
To address the second question, which is how gap year programs support students with learning disabilities, gap year programs are inherently designed with a high number of leader ratio to the number of students who are involved in each program. It's very common to see a ratio of 6 students to 1 leader. So even if a group is 18, that means there are 3 eyes wide open adults, probably support staff additional to that, who are there and participating with this group of young adults. So there are people who are connected to your child. They're there to support your child. They have space. They have the time to do that. They have the impetus to do that. It also helps because then the leaders can really manage and support group dynamics. So students who might be a little more shy or more hesitant to actually connect with other people are integrated in meaningful ways. And cliques that might naturally form in groups of students of this age can easily be manipulated, is probably the wrong word because it has a negative connotation, but it's really supporting more integration and less exclusivity. Additionally, one of the things we talk about within experiential education is this idea that moving from one's comfort zone into your stretch space, which is that space where we are still able to learn and grow quite effectively, but it's not always that graceful. That's an area that can be a little bit stressful for students when they're out on these kinds of experiences. And so we often talk about, if you're going to be exerting yourself and stretching yourself in one way, you should have spaces that are comfortable to be able to retreat into, that feel very safe, that feel very familiar. And that's why these programs include food and housing for the most part. Students are generally not responsible for doing all of their own cooking, right? If there is cooking as part of a program, there's usually a professional culinary artist who's there, who's supporting them and learning how to do that. Students, again, high levels of support within all these pieces. These programs want students to grow, but they want it to be in bite-sized chunks so nobody gets way past their stretch zone into that panic space where we can't do anything, like Jane was talking before. And then the other thing I mentioned earlier was the idea that these programs are less about academic experiences, and they're much more about an emphasis on personal growth. The mentorship that comes in these programs, the levels of facilitation, the activities that are chosen, the scaffolding and structure and progression of these kinds of experiences builds so that students are maximizing their growth. Again, that's the emphasis, so that they're coming out at each different challenge saying, wow, I feel more confident and able to handle the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll happily and likely come back to a lot of this, I know, in the Q&A. In terms of trying to understand what kind of programs, if anyone started to research, there's a lot out there, it can be really overwhelming. So just to kind of explain a few kind of areas that we try to help direct families, particularly if there are specific and unique concerns around a student, and a bit more scaffolding that they may need, at least initially, to feel and be successful. So one sort of set of phrases we want to introduce to you is this idea of residential versus expeditionary type programs. When one hears the term residential, it is very quick to assume therapeutic. When one hears the word expeditionary, it's very quick to assume wilderness. So I want to just kind of say no to that. And what we mean by residential is there's a home or a hostel or a hotel or some kind of base where the group basically lives for the duration of that program. Doesn't mean it's a therapeutic program or an LD specific program. We're just talking about a program that in its core, the model is a stationary one. So the bags are unpacked, there are day activities, wonderful rich content, group meetings and meals, but the group for the most part is living in one place. As opposed to expeditionary. Just debriefed a student today who did a 3-month program in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. 1 month in each country for 3 months. And she actually said to me, I said, what kind of critique or feedback do you have for the organization? And she said, they told me to bring a backpack. Do you know how hard it is to live out of a backpack every day? I wish I had a duffel.
That's good insight.
It's really good. So expeditionary, suggesting that every few days you're on the move. So for some families and who know that their child does really well with routine and doesn't respond well to a lot of change, you might be keeping your eyes on those more residential based programs as opposed to expeditionary.
Yeah.
Similarly, as we try to debunk in their definition of a gap year, your gap year does not need to be international if that is too much into the stretch or stress zone. There's loads of, not as many as we'd like, but there's lots more wonderful US-based options. And maybe you're going to test the waters of the gap year and think about kicking off your period of time in a more domestic program, meaning not home, but in the US, closer to home and not, overseas. So that might be another consideration for your family in thinking about what kind of program are you feeling like your child is best suited to. And then lastly, you've heard us now mention a few times soft skills versus hard skills. So in your kind of goal setting process, which should be a family driven one, student equally involved, as you explore the various goals of the gap year, why you're taking this time, what you hope to get out of it. Certainly, what some of the skills that you're hoping one will gain from it should be part of that. And if it's Spanish fluency, we've identified that. If it's being able, executive functioning, managing their time, knowing they're going to get out of bed, show up to meetings prepared, then we want to maybe look at programs that have that emphasis in either direction, which exist to support the development of those those desired skills. So, lots of nuance to look at beyond just a country or a skill, but there's kind of these are like the filters you'd put on when doing any good search. Is what are the filters we want to layer in here? And that will help you to reduce the scope of gap year from, a few million to a few thousand to a few hundred, and hopefully to maybe a few dozen hits when you start going down the Google path.
Right. So let's say you're convinced enough that you want to have this dialogue as a family. Gap year sounds interesting. What do you think about that, Billy? And what we would encourage you all to do is, if you are the potential gapper, or if your child is thinking about taking some gap time, we really want them to head off to a quiet space that they love being in with a pen and paper, pencil and paper. And we want them to start writing a free brainstorm that is free of practicality, that is free of restrictions, that's free of negative self-talk. We want students to put down the answers to questions like, well, if I could go anywhere in my gap time, where would I want to go? If I could learn any types of skills, what would I want to learn? If I could be around any types of people, who would I be around? If I could learn any kind of possible or be involved in any kind of possible opportunity, what are some of the things that would be really intriguing? We want students to have this unrestricted brainstorm, because these are the seeds that need a chance to grow. And as adults, we know there are practicalities. There are things that you as parents or guardians really are going to want to make sure are part of it or are not part of it. That's all fair conversation fodder. But in the beginning, during the brainstorm, we want the seeds to at least be planted, because if we don't give them any opportunity to germinate and grow, then we've cut them off before they even had a chance. And the reality is, parents, if you go off and go discuss your parameters and think about what's important to you and what the budget is and what are the things that you need to see happen, ultimately, when you come to the table together to begin discussing ideas and actually listening to one another, more than likely, some of those ideas are going to meet up and they're going to agree with each other. And that's the adult dialogue that we want to see gappers having with their parents, because after all, gap time is actually literally stepping from your young adult life, living at home with your family, out into the world in the first chapter of your adulthood. And that is scary for both parties, right? To have that happen. But we all need to work together for it to be successful. And then finally, the last thing we can't emphasize enough, if you take on one message from tonight, is transparency with programs. It's so hard to share the honest truth when one might believe that it could jeopardize one's candidacy for one of these awesome gap year programs. And we can tell you, having worn the leader hat, having worn the program director hat, having now worn the gap year consultant hat for many years, that when students and families are not transparent about what their history is, about what their medical, anxiety, medication, learning difference history is, or reality is, then these things inevitably come up while on program. And programs are maybe able to manage it in the moment, but oftentimes not. Programs want to know in advance who this candidate is and want to be able to say to you very directly, yes, we can help support you. Or unfortunately, we don't have the resources, but maybe this organization does. But in the case of most organizations where they'd say, yes, we'd like to support you, let's talk about the scaffolding pieces that we can put in place so said Billy can be successful on program. What can we do and put in all of these supports to make sure that that can happen? But if that's a surprise on week 5, that could be a disastrous surprise. So please trust us when we say be transparent. It's not a program's goal to eliminate any student from the pool. They want to help find best fit, and they want to do everything they can to help you find the best fit.
Just a few more slides here. And so kind of we're throwing a lot out at you. And here's where we try to kind of round the bend and bring it all together. So let's play out the scenario that you're taking or your child is taking a full gap year. And so the last concept we want to introduce, and Jason just mentioned, so you've got that working definition. We kind of talked about the benefits or even the whys of taking a gap year, identifying what those are. Jason talked about the goal setting and then layering the perimeters. And so now we've got kind of a story here of a lot of good, pieces of information. How do we pull it together? A year is actually a long time and a long enough time to do, for many of our students, multiple experiences, which could also include a semester at home, applying to college, or working and saving money. There's loads of opportunities here. At least one of those experiences we do hope will be out of the home. We often find that's really important in the fall. It makes sense to a parent. Let's stay home in the fall. You just graduate, just had a great summer. You can just keep doing your summer job. We get that it makes sense, but we can tell you as siblings head off back to school, as peers fly the hometown and head off to their destinations, it can have a rather demoralizing effect for the gapper who's living with their parents in the fall. So we find that once So being off on a fall program is really good way for a gapper to dive into these experiences, and be with their own peers, just as their friends and siblings are. And then even if they spend the winter at home, we don't find the same thing occurs. So if it's just kind of a one big experience in the fall, great, but want to impart that. But this idea here of the progression is that your year could consist of multiple parts. And if you were to think about it as a progression, then we would encourage you, makes sense, to start with the most structured. So I could have written fall and winter and spring over each of these three categories, but I didn't want those to be a distraction, but you could keep that in the back of your mind now that I've suggested it. What we want you to consider is, what does it mean? What does the most structured program mean, Jane and Jason? Well, it means that housing is included, meals are included. There's that group of peers we talked about, how important that is, and the mentors. The content could be a lot of different things. These kinds of programs will generally be focused on skills, life skills, other hard skills we've talked about. They could be travel oriented or have some other kind of thematic content, social justice, internships,
learning differences,
farm to table, sustainable agriculture, mindfulness, wilderness, all kinds of thematic content. But what's key to us here is that this is the most structured, this is the most scaffolding, and this is where all kinds of gappers, all gappers, thrive in the fall. And this is what most of our students have been doing this fall. They are starting to trickle home now, and they might be home anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months. There's no one way to do this. Now, some gappers will go on to do a second experience just as structured as the first. That may really resonate for you and your family and your child. But some students will come home and be like, all right, I think I got the hang of this now. I think I've got some notches on my belt, I guess. Can you say that? Like, I've got some learning that's happened. Can I apply that? Can we strip away some of the scaffolding? Yeah, maybe you can. So we move to this middle column of maybe a more semi-structured experience. So maybe the housing and meals are still included. And maybe now there's kind of a coordinator. Maybe the overseer is someone who is more of like an employer or a different type of role without doing as much kind of high touch, soft skill development. There could still be peers for sure, but this is a great time where students do a bit more of a deep dive. So if the fall is a bit more of a generalized experience, trying out a lot of different things, really focusing on my own personal growth, that middle experience might be a bit more of getting after a language or a specific skill or volunteering or something like that. And then for those who are feeling really adventurous and really ready, then that last experience of the gap year, this could now have been over a span of 6 to 12 months. For those kids who come to us and say, I want to drive across the country, I want to backpack around Europe, I want to travel throughout South America, those least structured experiences, no matter the kind of learner, will hear from us. That's great. Let's push it towards the end of the year, like the capstone of your year, where you will now take on, and having internalized 3 or 6 months of great experiences and role modeling and trials and tribulations, that next step of the most independent part of your gap year. Maybe there's housing, or maybe you're joining Hosteling International. Maybe you have a supervisor, maybe not. So we just want you to think about this progression. You might follow it or just kind of stick in one column for a while, but it's certainly a wonderful aspiration to think about front loading the gap time with the most structure, the most foundational part of skills and confidence, and seeing where a young adult might be able to take it from there on their own. Would you add to that?
I wouldn't.
Okay.
That was beautifully said.
We have 2 slides just to illustrate and case studies, profiles of students that kind of now show you that sort of model I just outlined, and I'll let Jason take it away.
Zach is an amazing student that we had a chance to work with a couple of years ago. And this was in the beginning of the pandemic. And one of Zach's main stated goals when he did his brainstorm, and we worked with him on goal setting, was he wanted to travel internationally. And of course, nobody was traveling internationally in fall 2020, right? We couldn't even go over the border to Canada at that point. So Zach did something really bold. he went on a wilderness leadership semester, and Zach lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He was not particularly outdoorsy, though he was athletic before this, and he decided to go on a 3-month expedition that traveled through the desert Southwest in our country. So not only did he see a completely different environmental region, but he had a chance to have interactions culturally as well throughout that semester that were really interesting and intriguing about issues and land issues within that area, land issues that they don't have in Georgia, land issues we don't have in New England. And it was really fascinating and empowering for him. This is a wilderness leadership semester. Zach shined during that semester. In fact, was elected essentially kind of captain of his group for quite a big period of his time of expeditioning while there, which was amazing and felt great for him. When he got home, borders had opened in a few places, including Costa Rica. And so Zach, wanting to work on his Spanish, wanting to be involved in some volunteering and meaningful immersion, had a chance to travel to Costa Rica, was with a much smaller group of peers at that point in time, and had less infrastructure and support, but enough that he had a compelling homestay-based experience, good language learning, and then again, some great volunteering. He also got to try out a lifehood dream of his, which was to learn how to surf, which he had never done. And he had a chance to do a little bit of surfing and traveling, and, wiped out as many times as I'm sure he had a chance to stand up, but loved it. And this became something that was really fun for him and a standout memory, even though it was such a small part of his gap time. Finally, he went off and he is now in college, and it's been great to hear from him. Zach, who again was not interested in the wilderness before this, is now a major leader in the outings club at his college. He's made a lot of really amazing friends, particularly those folks who are either from other countries and going to that school or interested in travel, and immediately felt like he had cohort of peers beyond just the dorm and the shenanigans of the dorm. And he immediately sought out those kind of great activities once he arrived there.
One more student to profile, another total inspiration, is Emma. And I want to start with Emma's quote. "I took a gap year to explore life outside of school and to get real world experience. This year has been the most fulfilling of my life." I mean, that's like what we hear every day when we're lucky. And it's so profound to be on that journey with students. So Emma has worked really hard to, explore sciences, not easy, and with an idea of maybe trying to pursue a field of medicine, a big reach for her, but something that felt really intriguing. So she stayed home in the fall. We advised her against, but she had a plan, and she actually did an accelerated course to become an EMT. So she spent the fall at home, but because she had so much focus and studying, it actually worked out quite well. And achieved her EMT and the certifications and licensures that she had to go through. In the winter, then joined the group program that was in Hawaii. So had a really, as you can see, just joyful and robust experience with a group of peers traveling, diving into kind of the culture and landscape of Hawaii. And came back and got a job on an ambulance and ended up working for about 4 or 5 months on an ambulance. And I think quite surprised herself about how much she was able to find success being the youngest person on the ambulance, going through those early stages of not knowing much, not feeling like she knew enough, but sticking with it, getting great mentoring from her peers, from the other EMTs on the ambulance. And really confirming that she was going to really try and get after being pre-med in college, where she is now a freshwoman. So I think, again, using the gap year for Zach, it was really about going to college during COVID didn't feel right, but also had never really felt like he'd found his people. And we didn't read his quote, but he was really eager to make friends and know that he could do that. And he did make wonderful friends. That was part of his quote. Emma really wanted to explore this as a possible career path and get some level, some sign, some level of confirmation that she could do it and could be good at it and like it before starting to commit a college path to it. And so that was her kind of outcome, which is, again, just another wonderful case study. I'll just leave this up for a minute. I might recommend people screenshot it. I can't see any kind of Q&A, Elizabeth, so you'll just need to share with us what you're seeing. And I could just leave this up actually for the time being. And I'm just going to mute for a moment and wait for you to comment, question, anything.
Okay, I think it's a great idea to leave that up. I'm having a very weird experience because I have Facebook open so I can see the chat, but I'm listening to us through Zoom. And so I can see there's a delay, just like on live television, I guess. So I am going to navigate this as best I can. Hopefully, Facebook is catching up with our conversation. So, and thanks as always, you guys are so thoughtful about this and so encouraging. And I am sure that for the parents who are paying attention, knowing that you also have your own student with learning disabilities and ADHD is probably really helpful in recognizing that you know what questions to ask, and that you sympathize. I think that it's hard because it feels like a lot of opportunities. I think, parents feel like a lot of opportunities are not as open to their students as they are to their neurotypical peers. And so that's why I love bringing you back every year to talk to people about the opportunities and to show them that, there are chances out there. So we do have 2 questions, and I'm going to encourage people to keep putting them in the chat there. The first question is from Stacy. She is looking for academic skills development programs. Do you folks provide any information on how to find such programs?
One of the areas that we've found that students who are graduating from high school might pursue, there's a couple of different avenues. One of which is actually referred to often as a PG year, which is confusing because we use that term elsewhere as well. Essentially, it's like a 5th year of high school, but it's usually conducted at some really beautiful private school campus here in the United States. And one of the reasons students choose to do this is because they can then work on their academic skill sets. They have a lot more freedom in terms of choosing the classes that they want to take, which generally means more success because students are generally excited about the classes that they're taking. And because it's on a campus like this, it tends to be a much smaller cohort. So again, you have a high teacher to student ratio and a lot of personalized attention. Also for students who are athletes, musicians, artists, this is a great chance for you to continue developing those skill sets because often there are quite a few resources available. These programs are actually not much difference in cost from what you might find with a facilitated gap year experience. So it's kind of all within that realm and ballpark. That's one of the ideas that came to my mind.
Yeah, and specifically to the learning differences, I would always encourage families to reach out to some schools like, well, for instance, the Foreman School, which is a fairly well-known private school in Connecticut for students with ADD, ADHD, other learning differences. They have launched a GAP program, and I think very much with that eye on helping support students through an experiential model, how to continue to develop their kind of academic, analytical kind of mindset. So I would even start with a program like that. And then otherwise, I would just lean into that kind of high school private community. A lot of them have summer enrichment programs or may have referrals for other kind of experiential opportunities, either during the year or during the summer in particular. The gap year world, so Ingenuity is really one of the few specifically focused on creating gap programs for LD students. But what we've often seen, and I know the question was really about the academics, so this is a bit, I'm going to veer off here a little bit, but the gap programs are just so well suited to support students who've been having struggles in school, because again, they're so focused on the personal growth of students, and really coming at students in a way that they haven't yet been approached within high school, and certainly it won't happen at college. And we see that the way that students are elevated in their own kind of personal perception and mental health and what's asked of them in terms of their engagement with the program and the community really kind of elevates them in a way that reflects on their academics as well. And I realize that's a big stretch, but there is a base level in which many of the quality gap year programs out there, even though they aren't specifically or overtly focused on students or supporting students academically, that it becomes a byproduct by nature of how they are imparting this level of curiosity, but also agency. So a two-part kind of answer for me to address that.
Yeah, and one other idea that just came to me as you were mentioning the Foreman schools, that fabulous schools like Landmark College also have really interesting academic skill development programs. I had a student who we explored a number of different options, and he ultimately ended up choosing Landmark as a fall semester for himself, which was great. And he had really great things to say about it, even though it wasn't him being enrolled in Landmark for, their typical college matriculation. He was a really interesting academic skills development program for him. And then he was ultimately able to go on to the college that he'd been accepted to.
That's great.
Yep.
I am trying to drop these links. Let me ask you, is there a good, like not clearinghouse, but list somewhere of schools that offer PG years for people who are interested in that?
I'd have to look too. It's very easy to just say PG years, United States, and you will get a whole listing of them. I've looked it up a few times, and there's, somebody every year reviews all of them. And so.
Okay. And I dropped the Foreman year ingenuity, Foreman ingenuity year link in here. Stacy did have a follow-up that I'm sure a lot of people have, which is, do students typically apply for college while they're high school seniors and then take the gap?
So it's
a really good question.
It's a great question. And the answer is changing, and the ratios are starting to change. So if you'd asked us that question 5 years ago, we would say 100% you should apply during senior year. All of the resources are there. You've got your academic counselor at school who's supporting you. You've got your teachers who actually know you and remember you in that moment, ready to write you letters of reference. All the momentum is going there. Your classmates are doing this. It all makes sense. And that's true. If you can apply in the fall of your senior year and you have the energy for that, that's a positive thing, because at the worst, it was a dry run dress rehearsal. You learned a lot. Maybe you didn't get into the college of your dreams. And then we can talk about option 2. But at the best, you got into the school of your dreams. You requested deferral from that school. Instead of going in fall 2023, you want to go in fall 2024. You write a very short letter to fulfill their requirements to ask for that deferral. And usually it's granted. And most schools in this country will grant that level of deferment. But we're seeing more students who either applied in their fall of their senior year and didn't get into the school of their dreams and reapply during their gap year, or students who are saying, you know what, it's just too much senior year. It's too much for me to apply right now. I can't wrap my head around going to visit these schools yet. I don't even know what kind of school I want to go to. I don't even know if I want to go to college. And so in the spring of senior year, they go on some of these college visits. So they've had like 6 more months of maturity, of building up a sense of who they are, of what they might want. They do some of their applications in the summertime. They don't write the essay to submit because they're going to go on this awesome fall gap year experience. They come back around Thanksgiving or the winter holiday time, like most of our students are doing now. They dot the I's, they cross the T's, they submit, and voila. Now they are not only a 4-year high school graduate with their academic record to show it, and hopefully positive academic trajectory on that GPA throughout senior year, but you've also had this amazing gap experience. So those are all really positive things. As Jane mentioned before, colleges across the country are highly respectful and respecting of gap year students. They know the maturity that comes out of doing this.
That sounds great. Yeah, and it's interesting that it's changing, because I mean, for as long as we've been doing this, I know that the answer has previously been that they do it while they're applying. And I do think it makes so much sense. I also get that feeling of relief if it's not too overwhelming of getting it over with and not having that process to do.
Yep.
So we've gotten we're getting questions and comment, the more of a comment than a question, one of which is, Laura Shupfetridge, do you know her? Yeah. Okay. Wants everybody to know that her daughter is at Foreman for a PG year right now, and that her older daughter worked with you for her gap year, and that even so, one of her daughters has LD and executive functioning issues and hadn't considered a gap year might be an option. So, yay.
Consider it.
Yay for you guys for letting her know. This is a great question. Barbara wants to know, where can one find an LD mentor who may be currently on a gap year? Now at college, Barbara, that's a great question. You may be aware of, and let me put this in, it's oops. Barbara, there's an organization that I'm very fond of called Eye to Eye National, and they do mentoring usually through schools. So they'll set up a chapter at a high school. Sometimes it used to be primarily college students mentoring elementary age students through art projects, and that would be set up by their school. I thought that they had expanded to high school now. You might want to also try the National Center for LD and contact them and see if they have any links to mentors. I'm trying to think of where else, but to go back to the gap year though question, that's a really interesting question, Jane and Jason.
I was just gonna completely push that back to you, Elizabeth. I mean, in terms of, I think the best we could offer is probably, find a current family that we're working with, and with their permission, and this person who's asked can email us. We'd contact our family first and just say, with your permission, as a parent with a kid with a learning difference, would you be comfortable talking about the pros and cons of taking this path? That would be something we'd be happy to connect if that somewhat touches on it. But beyond that, at this point, I don't know that either of us are aware of
like a group. No.
Yeah, a group or a professional. We would probably say call Elizabeth. So,
Fair enough.
But in terms of just connecting with other families, that's be something we'd be more than happy to help bridge that gap.
Okay.
And specifically around ADD or ADHD, I mean, it's not a stretch to say that a third of our students have that diagnosis in one way, either of those two diagnoses, so or both. And so that has been a very common theme over the many years now that we've been working in experiential education. And once again, I think just speaks to the kinds of programming that have also formed around the students who take this kind of time. So in general, we find it to be very positive for them.
In answer to Karen's question, yes, this is going to be recorded. It should continue to show up on my Facebook page, which you're on, I think, currently. And also I will be putting it up on my YouTube channel by the end of the week, and you can watch it there. And anybody who's not on Facebook who would like to see this. I don't know if this question is for you, so but Stacy wants to know more about, I don't know if this is directed at you or to Laura. I think Laura, if you're listening, please check the comments. Stacy wants to connect with you by DM. Stacy, if you would like to connect with Jane and Jason to learn more about Foreman, I think you certainly can contact them, but shouldn't they, just contact Foreman?
We're definitely we're much more familiar with the Ingenuity Year. We've been dialoguing with that team in the development of that program over the last years. So we certainly could help bridge that gap. But Foreman itself as a school, we don't have any particular context. So I think Laura would probably be a great contact for that.
Yeah.
If she's open.
Yeah, and I guess what I see that I'm confounding them, like Ingenuity Year and a PG year. So yeah, like I told you, the closer we get to my bedtime. Let's see. Tara says my child is dealing with anxiety and depression. I would love them to take a gap year, but worry about them being disengaged from their therapeutic supports. Thank you, Tara, because I was actually going to feed them a question just like that. All right. Any thoughts?
So many thoughts. If you haven't already gleaned from the last hour, Jason and I have a lot to say. Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear it. And it's not, it's none of us are any stranger to seeing this among the young adults that we're working with. Programs are no exception. Jason gave this sort of rough estimate that a third maybe of our students have ADD or ADHD. I would include with that anxiety, depression, and are taking medication and or seeing a therapist as well. Just to even give an example, I can think of two. Last weekend, we were visiting a gap year program in Maine. They actually have built a cabin called the Care Cabin, where students get to go to have their therapy calls, privacy, because they live in more dormitory style spaces and don't have a lot of privacy, and they have restricted technology use. So they've literally constructed a cozy little cabin on this campus in coastal Maine where students can go to have their one-on-one calls with their therapist. So if there are many silver linings or any silver linings to COVID, I think telehealth is one of them. So if that is something that your child is already doing, yes, programs, many programs, not all will be able to guarantee it, but most programs are going to go out of their way to help support that continued level of connection with one's therapist. So that's just an example here in the States. And of course, in that spirit of full transparency that Jason talked about earlier, making sure you're fully disclosing. Everyone will ask for a health form. Please don't hide what medications or therapies your child might be on or have been on. It's so important for those of us who are responsible for their care to know the full story and to be able to support that. I also debriefed a student who just spent a semester in Southeast Asia. And even when the students don't get to have their phones for the first month of the program reports back, leaders report to the headquarters puts up blogs, so parents are communicated with. This idea of no news is good news. But there were some hiccups along the way for this young student of mine. And during that month of no phone, she was able to, with submit a request, get access to her phone to schedule appointments with her therapist. So, these programs, again, this is not their first rodeo. They understand the population that's coming to them. They want these kids to be successful. And so I think if the program itself has the ability and the location to do it, yes, they're going to go out of their way to help support and continue the care that is working right now for your son or daughter.
To piggyback off of that, as you're probably ascertaining from this conversation, we mentioned earlier that most gap year programs are not therapeutic in nature, meaning they don't have a trained social worker on staff. They don't have a trained therapist on staff. They have a set of resources in case of emergency and crisis, which hopefully they're not having to ever access, but they're not therapeutic programs. And that being said, we are finding that there are several organizations that are now kind of bridging that space between therapeutic and a typical GAP program. They're being dubbed more wellness-based programs right now, but they do exist within the gap year space, and they do have those licensed clinicians on their teams. So again, this is not a rehabilitation program, but it might be a program where you're just going to get a little bit of extra space and care. So that might be a great option for another family who's on this call.
Mm-hmm. Is the dorm one of those? Have you guys heard of the dorm?
I have heard, yes, we've heard of the dorm. That program, that is one of their stated intentions, or at least has been. It wasn't one of the ones that we have discussed and talked to about their programming yet. There are actually a couple of other ones that are based up in Costa Rica, for example. But the dorm is one that has crossed across both of our radars, I know. Yep.
Okay, yeah, that's really a more treatment focused, right? Yeah, I see that now. I'll drop it just for anybody who's listening who's interested. We had a question to go back to. Could you just give a quick description of Ingenuity Year?
Yeah, their program has been focused on climate change and ecology. So that's one piece of feedback we've given, is that, when enrollment was low a year ago, that they might broaden their theme, because that's not what every student is interested in. But we actually had Kai Johnson, who's the director of it, joined this conversation with us last year. And he's really the best one to give an overview of it, but it is a residential model. So they're living in one place. They're using a campus in Maine. And really trying to leverage the resources, the natural resources of that area, the local fishermen and sort of the local economies, and sort of trying to use that as a form of interaction and engagement and connection for the students. And I think that weaving it into an environmental theme just made a lot of sense to the team there. And woven with that is helping students to develop some of those more kind of independent living skills, all of the planning and cooking meals as a team, conflict resolution, and just a lot of that kind of soft skill development, while also going out on these kind of field trips and excursions, learning from locals. And I think every student puts together maybe an independent project of some kind.
That's correct.
That they present at the end. And I think it can have an arts focus. I don't think, again, it's not overtly academic. So I'm trying to be really careful here, but I think they're trying to get students to engage intellectually and personally and passionately, and then synthesize, pick a theme, and kind of create some kind of final project to share with the group at the end.
And one of the things that makes Ingenuity Year through the Foreman School so unique is just really investing in this sense of place. They really want students to get to know this particular place and know the people who are in it. And again, as Jane said, they're trying to ultimately allow mentors from the community to connect with students who have their same interests and passions, so that that can be brought out in a meaningful way with the students, but also that the community can see how invested this program is in that space too. So it's a beautiful program. It is a slower paced experience than traveling around to 3 countries in East Africa would be, right? It's going to have different stressors and less stressors less frequently than an experience like that, which is part of what makes it so wonderful, and support the students that are a good fit.
Yeah.
I have dropped the link to last year's chat with Kai and Jane and Jason into the chat. This was a good question, and I promise we'll wrap up soon. I know you guys have had a long day. Where was that one? Somebody asked sort of like, of course I can't find it now. I think the question was like, how do students with LD, ADHD do on these experiences? And I think you spoke to that at the beginning, but if there's anything else you want to say? Oh, here we go. How do twice exceptional participants tend to do?
I mean, it's hard to make, one answer apply to all. I mean, I think there could very well be some challenges for any student taking this kind of step into this kind of experience. And what's fascinating is as accepting and as inclusive and as skill building as these programs are, they also have a high degree of accountability, and students may be held to a higher degree of accountability from someone other than their parent than they ever have before. So there's kind of an interesting rub there. I often think back to trips I've led in my 20s, and I remember having a non-college bound student on a gap semester, and basically like a Stanford bound female, and who just had the world in the palm of her hand, ostensibly, was all ready to go. And lo and behold, you get to, rural East Africa, and it really kind of levels the playing field. And the male student, the non-college bound student, really found his stride, found himself totally at ease, being swarmed by, the kids in the village. These were teaching internships, and we were teaching English. And this young woman who really carefully planned and controlled her life for a long time had a real struggle letting go and kind of surrendering to life in rural East Africa. So it doesn't really matter what we come with to some degree, because these experiences can be the great equalizer, because what you've built your success on in high school in particular, my good looks, my athleticism, my grades, my brain, my popularity, may or may not, add to any more ease when you start looking at experiential programs that are meant to kind of shake everybody up quite a bit. So I have found that, twice exceptional students have been as successful, if not more successful than a typical, and have also, of course, faced some of their challenges. They aren't going away. So when we take ourselves out of the comforts of home and move out into these experiences, they will be triggering. So if I'm experiencing anxiety or depression at home, that's going to come with me. If I'm experiencing, or if I have ADHD, or if I'm on the spectrum at home, that comes with me. And so that's why that transparency piece, sorting through the right programs, talking to the directors, talking to alumni referrals, making sure students have skin in the game and are helping to lead this conversation, is a lot of pieces at play to ensure that we've done our best to find a good match. And then what's ahead is it's not a guaranteed success, but generally speaking, there'll be a lot of people in your child's corner rooting for their success, and more people than they would have in many more typical environments like high school or college. So that's my first take on that.
And I would just add, this is why it's so important to actually do a little bit of this thoughtful planning and thinking and have honest conversations together as a family. For any student, we want to align them with areas that they're going to feel successful, because as Jane is mentioning, these other areas that are going to stretch them will cause levels of stress. So you want to have both things, right? We want to feel good. So for a student who experiences a particular type of challenge, we would want to help support a student in finding the right placement through a referral to a program that is going to challenge them in appropriate ways, but is also going to help them lean into what they're strong in and help them feel really good. So both things can happen at the same time.
Yeah.
Also good. And students can take their medications with them.
Yes,
They should.
they have. Yeah, we discourage.
They should keep taking them.
We actually do a whole health and safety piece with our families, and a gap year is not a time to experiment with medications.
Right.
If it's working, we want you to stay on it, and programs would as well. Most programs will ask that students are independently responsible for their meds. So if that's not something that's happening now, that's something really worth starting to transfer that responsibility from the parent to the child.
Before I forget to do this, we had a parent, in case you're watching this on Facebook, we had somebody ask about experiences for students with mobility related disabilities, physical disabilities, wheelchair users. So I can only share this link here. It's called Mobility International USA, and it's an organization that is dedicated to trying to increase opportunities for people who have mobility impairments. I don't know that they necessarily do gap year experiences, but that could be a good place to start.
I think they're starting to broker. I think they're starting to move into it. And we also have a wonderful contact that we want to share.
Oh, great.
You want to mention, is it Annie?
Her name is Annie Tolkien. And she is at accessiblecollege.com. And Annie is awesome. She's such an amazing advocate for individuals with all kind of mobility modalities. And she specializes in supporting students on making the right choice for college based upon their mobility needs. And she's just so great.
She's great. And I would encourage people to follow her on Instagram or schedule a call with her. We actually collaborated about a particular young woman, a wheelchair user, who ended up going to college, but I made a lot of calls to see what kind of programs could accommodate her. And there were more than I expected. So that's a really particular call that I'd be happy to have one-on-one with that family who asked, destinations, transportation, bathrooms, the things that we're trying to also come up to speed on with our own education. We recognize are things that all need to be in place, and just not every experience has that in place, but a few do. I had a young woman a few years ago who was considered legally blind, who had a great and successful experience and was very well supported in Spain, where she wanted to be. And so I think Europe and some of the other programs that I talked to that were able to support were also in Europe. So that I'm aware that Europe, in terms of if it wants to be an international destination, it has its challenges too, but that could work. And I think there could be some in the US as well. I have an art school in Ireland that was also able to accommodate.
Oh, wow.
So we want to, in addition to looking at that very important perimeter, what are some of the other things we're getting at thematically, content wise, so that we can then help direct that search.
Mhm.
Awesome. Yeah, one thing to keep in mind is that, you know, the disability laws in place here in this country only apply in this country.
That's exactly
And
right.
so even if it's an American program setting up elsewhere, the prevailing law of that land is the one that you need to pay attention to. And so I certainly know from the college end, that is an issue when students want to go on semesters abroad. Then sometimes there are challenges with that. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying you have Jane and Jason's contact information. They are available to you. If you want to know more about what the college landscape looks like and why another year to let them, you know, mature a little bit and develop their skills, check out my website for free information. And in the new book that is coming out March 8th, you can see the questions that I put to Jane and Jason and their answers about gap years. So I am going to ask this, I'm going to have us pause for a minute because I'm watching this live stream. It's a very strange experience, and seeing that it's still catching up, and I want to end this stream until it catches up. But thank you so much, as always. It's always lovely to see you. Hang on for me, and we'll just give this a moment to kind of fade out. Thank you all for staying on. I see a bunch of you have stayed on this whole time. Follow up, share this for your friends who aren't on Facebook. It will be on YouTube, I'm hoping, by the end of the week. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Okay, we're good.
Juicy.
Hi.
Hi.
Great. That was fun.
Yeah.